Hi, friends. Let's kick it off with some intros. My name is Avichal, one of the co-founders at Electric Capital. Thank you all for coming and staying, especially this far into what's been a long week for a lot of people, I'm sure. We'll try to make it worth your while. You guys want to do quick intros, and then I can tee up the topic, and we'll just kind of have a discussion. Given how many people are here, I assume these are people who actually care, which is awesome. And so having this many people who actually are into this stuff is a treat, because like the P&D crowd is not here. And so if people have questions, we might have some time. So keep questions in mind, or you can find these guys afterwards too. These guys are both experts at what they do. So you want to maybe kick it off, and we'll just do quick intros on kind of your backgrounds and what you're working on.
Yeah, definitely. So hey everybody, I'm Austin. I gave a short chat earlier, but I'm a product manager at Offchain Labs, the original creators of Arbitrum. I work across a bunch of our newer initiatives, including like some core protocol upgrades to the existing Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova chains. Arbitrum Orbit, which is our permissionless app chain offering, and then Stylus, which is our new execution environment for a WebAssembly-based VM.
Hey everyone. Hey everyone. Hi. My name is Cem. I'm from Sovereign Labs. I'm one of the co-founders and I'm the CEO. Previous to Sovereign, I used to work on one of the Ethereum consensus clients, Teku. At Sovereign, we build the rollup framework called Sovereign SDK. Sovereign SDK enables people to build rollups on any base blockchain, including Ethereum, Celestia, Bitcoin, even Solana. And yeah, happy to chat about rollups.
Yeah. So, and just for context, I think these are two different approaches, and I think it's really good that people in the developer ecosystem are experimenting and trying new things, and there's always trade-offs. I think if you told me 5 years ago that Ethereum would look the way that it does today, I just wouldn't have believed you. Or I'll give you a different example outside the Ethereum ecosystem. Like, I just wouldn't have predicted that Bitcoin NFTs would be as big as they are. Like, it wasn't even possible to do this thing 2 years ago. And so I think it's awesome that actually we have so many tens of thousands of developers that are experimenting and trying new things. And you just never know kind of what developers downstream will do with that stuff. And so I think it's great that we have multiple approaches. And so maybe we'll start off high level, and then we can kind of dig in and sort of talk about some of the trade-offs. But maybe at the highest level, how do you think about Ethereum alignment? Like, why do you think that meme is such a meme and has become so powerful? You guys have thoughts on this at a high level? Like, how do you define Ethereum alignment, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So, I think from a high level, Ethereum alignment means generally trying to have the same ethos and the spirit of Ethereum and moving towards a trustless and decentralized block space. And so whether that be inheriting the security of Ethereum or being EVM equivalent or compatible so that developers on L1 can easily port their contracts over to your chain. This Ethereum alignment is so important to some developers and some chain operators because it allows them to tap into this just like community that has existed for almost close to a decade now. And so this is just like, for bootstrapping, like activity and liquidity, you can kind of leverage this whole ecosystem that has been built and battle tested in a way that invites other people in rather than trying to do something completely new.
And how do you? That's a good high-level summary. How do you think about? The question for both of you all. How do you think about the benefits from a developer's perspective of aligning with Ethereum versus maybe some of these other ecosystems that are up and coming? And you want to take this, Cem, in terms of how you think about all these other ecosystems relative to Ethereum?
Yeah, just coming back to Ethereum alignment, honestly, I don't think much about Ethereum alignment, nor do we as a company. I think Ethereum has great values that come from like cypherpunk values that want to scale this compute paradigm of permissionless, verifiable, and censorship resistant applications. And so on Ethereum blockchain or elsewhere, if we can replicate and like if we can achieve technologies that can do that at scale, I think that's what crypto's mission should be in my mind. And in some ways, like I think having bridges to Ethereum and being able to bring in trust minimizer or trustless liquidity from Ethereum is, I think, critical for applications, because a lot of applications, the number one priority is being able to bring in liquidity. So in that way, I think having bridges to Ethereum is important, but I think Ethereum alignment is a bit too political of a subject that product-focused people should not be thinking too much about.
Yeah. I guess from a developer perspective, how do you, I mean, this is a high-level question. Maybe we'll come back to ETH alignment in a second, but how do you think about supporting all these different chains? How do you think about, from a developer's perspective, where to pick how to build? Like, presumably you have some thesis behind Sovereign choosing to be sort of chain agnostic in this way. So how did you think about that?
So initially, we were frankly trying to build like rollups without leveraging the L1 execution, because L1 execution always seemed to be the bottleneck. For example, one of the reasons Polygon CDK, for example, is way more expensive, or generally ZK rollups are in some ways expensive when you're trying to deploy app chains on them compared to optimistic ones, is that verification costs on L1 become like the biggest cost factor. And so we were trying to like achieve building secure rollups from like an agnostic perspective, not like looking at Ethereum architecture or Ethereum rollup architecture. And what we arrived to is the sovereign rollup architecture. And when you build with no L1 execution in mind, with no EVM in mind, then you notice that you can just deploy these rollups on any base blockchain. You just have a simple interface so that you can prove that you like sent the data to the space layer blockchain, and every blockchain can have a different adapter that provides that information, verification information. But you basically arrive at like a architecture where you can swap out the base blockchain quite rapidly and easily for the developer.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, I just think to touch on this point, it's interesting to see how the space has progressed. When Arbitrum first launched, almost every application was on L1 Ethereum. And so that EVM equivalence and compatibility was extremely important as, you know, for bootstrapping those developers over to a new network. Over time, though, we've seen that like developers no longer have to launch on L1 Ethereum initially to be successful. We're seeing more and more apps launch on an L2 or an alternate chain at first, and then, you know, port over to other chains. And we're now seeing this like this friction from developers. Not only do they have to choose what maybe EVM compatible rollups to launch on, which, while, you know, a bit annoying, at least you can just port over the same exact contracts without doing a full rewrite of your code. But now we're seeing like all these other different type of VMs and maybe even all L1s that aren't EVM compatible. And so the choice for developers is getting even tougher, and why we're seeing so much more fragmentation. And so it's just another trade-off that we've been moving towards.
So actually touching on that, just could you both dig in? How do you think about this? I mean, I think it's one of the bigger challenges with the Ethereum space, but in terms of, you know, crypto more broadly, is just the sheer number of options that you have just went through the roof. I guess how do you, when you're working with developers or your DevRel teams or working with devs, like how do you advise them to think about this? Like, are there specific things that you say, hey, this set of components off the shelf like really makes sense together? Or do you take a lighter touch and say, actually have your pick and the market will figure it out? And that's sort of one set of questions, and then the follow-up is like, I mean, do you think we've kind of gone too far? You know, there was a time where there was like not enough infrastructure, and now it feels like there's 18 different ways to do the same thing. And would we be better off if actually we all just sort of said, hey guys, we don't need to have 18 different ways to do the same thing? I'm just kind of curious how you think about it more generally. But yeah, maybe on that first, what do y'all tell your ecosystems about how to think about this?
I think it really depends on the developing team. Some teams really just want to leverage the existing EVM smart contracts they have and want to get moving with a dedicated, scalable, like throughput providing like app rollup. And in those cases, for example, we suggest leveraging EVM module in Sovereign SDK, just plugging in an existing, being fully compatible with Ethereum, like EVM smart EVM. But if like the user wants a lot more flexibility, customizability. They generally want to have more control over the stack. Then they can think about just starting from a clean slate, the same way you write your like backend application with Node.js or with whatever like regular Web2 framework that you use. You can just write code and include step functions, just do things that a virtual machine would block you from doing. So I think it's important to provide customers like both, like the flexibility to go easy and quick, or achieve the highest performance possible and still feel secure doing that.
Yeah, and agreed that it's a case by case basis in some cases. But what I've seen a lot of teams, because they ask, should we deploy on an existing chain? Should we launch our own chain? I think it really depends on the application. And so if you're a liquidity dependent application, most likely the suggestion is going to be to try and launch on an existing chain like Arbitrum, because it already has that bootstrapped liquidity and ecosystem of applications already on there. There's two ways that I see like the kind of the app chain and you're deploying your own chain makes sense. One is if you don't need liquidity, like if you're an on-chain game and you don't really need millions or billions of dollars on your chain, like doing this on your own chain with your own dedicated block space makes sense. And if you need to leverage customizations to make that happen, whether it be through additional precompiles or an alternate VM, then that makes sense. The other thing I've been suggesting to teams is you can start on an existing chain, and you almost use that as a launch pad to bootstrap a community of users that will then come to your new chain once you're ready to expand past it. Ideally, if you're bootstrapping activity in the early phases, you won't need your own chain, because getting all of that infrastructure on your chain is not just expensive but cumbersome. And I've experienced this personally with even Arbitrum Nova, which is an Arbitrum branded chain, getting centralized exchange withdrawals and indexing and good block explorers. It's not easy. And so I urge teams to maybe try out an existing chain and then move on once they're ready.
One thought. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can I can I add on to that? So I think that is a very good point. Right now, there is such a huge delta between the ease of permissionlessly deploying your smart contract versus deploying your application as a rollup. And one of the biggest reasons for that is a lot of the infrastructure we use, like oracles, and yeah,
Got on ramps,
on-ramps and all that stuff. Yeah,
infrastructure.
all that infrastructure, with even people are getting used to deploying those on app rollups. All those engagements look like just B2B agreements. So you have to go in and talk to someone. Whereas when you're deploying in a smart contract, you can immediately query the Chainlink smart contract on the same chain. So there is a little bit of a gap from the infrastructure from the tooling side, but as these tooling companies understand that rollups are basically new smart contracts, I think we're going to see that delta decrease, and the incumbent tooling firms, if they don't enable permissionless deployments, they're going to be left behind by new entrants that enable, for example, seamless permissionless Oracle deployments on these app rollups.
It's sort of related to kind of this infrastructure point and kind of the sort of liquidity that you were talking about. Sort of two other dimensions that are related here, I think, are interoperability and composability. So how do your ecosystems think about the idea of interop? Like, if I'm using application A and I should just be able to go use application B, and sort of everything kind of works as a user or potentially as a developer. And then how do you think about composability? I mean, one of the really obviously killer things about permissionless blockchain infrastructure is the composability of one smart contract's output is another smart contract's input. So how do you think about those in your ecosystems? Like, do you favor one over the other? Do you think they're both possible in these ecosystems? Just how do you guys think about those, interop and composability?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about where we're at right now and where we see potential offering in the future. So right now, launching an Orbit chain, which is Arbitrum's permissionless app chain offering. like what you get out of the box is a native enshrined bridge to its parent chain. Whether if you're an L3, that may be to Arbitrum. If you're an L2, that would be to Ethereum. When it comes to interoperating with other chains, you're mostly left to like external interoperability providers like Hop or Connext or Layer 0, Axelar. There's tons of options out there that are all like, chomping at the bit to support all of these orbit chains. And so in terms of getting these stood up in a way that's quick and easy for these orbit chains, these have been great options for them. Obviously, like these all come with trade-offs. And so one thing we've been working on is this concept called chain clusters, where at a fundamental level, it's a set of chains that share a single bridge contract and a shared validator set. And so with these two components, these chains can, in essence, trust each other. And if these chains can trust each other, then they can almost enable these cross-chain transfers natively in seconds or under a second. The trade-off here is that if one chain goes down, they're all going down. And so you have this weakest link phenomena. But this trade-off becomes acceptable if maybe it's one entity running all these chains. Like, for example, we have this one game that sees themselves expanding past the throughput of a single chain. So there's a lot of gaming chains where they see like many games on one chain. They actually see themselves as one game, many chains. That's like how big of a scale they're envisioning. And so if they're running all these chains in a cluster, that trade-off of a weakest link phenomena becomes more acceptable. The other time it becomes maybe acceptable is if they are sharing like the same or similar code bases that have been hardened, and are electing specific members into this cluster. It's likely not going to be permissionless.
Yeah, so we see a future that like both of these things exist. So in general purpose chains with like virtual machine, we definitely will have applications most likely on the DeFi side that depend on atomic composability a lot. And then you will have applications that don't necessarily depend on atomic composability a lot. They're okay with async calls like we're used to in the Web 2 paradigm, going to like just making a network request. And as a result, and they prefer higher throughput more than they prefer atomic composability. So we do expect both of these paradigms, chains with lots of applications versus app rollups to exist in the future. In our minds, it's more like 80-20. Long tail of applications are app rollups, and 20% of like the chains are highly performant VM chains that have lots of applications that are most likely around DeFi and liquidity. So the way we approach this is we're just making sure our rollup framework is as flexible to handle both VMs and app chains.
Could you maybe zoom in on that a little bit? How does, in practice, like bridging of assets and interop work in the sovereign world? Like how would that, is it out of the box available, or do you have to do a bunch of work to make it happen? How does it work today?
So right now we're integrating IBC, but IBC, if anyone here worked on it, does come with a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of round trips, and using ZK, you can decrease a lot of like the inefficiencies of IBC. So we'll, as soon as we get to production, which will happen sometime this year, for our next iteration, we'll be working for a ZK-focused sovereign IBC. This is a vision that we've been talking about for the last 2 years. You can basically have mesh connection with the all the app rollups by just sending an aggregated proof of all the rollups in the ecosystem. And so we think that will unlock a lot of value, and we'll have like native IBC type transfers for each app rollup. But that's not going to be in the V0 of Sovereign SDK.
So maybe building on this compare contrast, like I said, I think it's really good that the ecosystem supports both, and there are multiple approaches, and different teams are taking different approaches. Are there certain kinds of applications or certain kinds of developers that you really, like if people came up to you afterwards and asked you for advice, that you might say, actually you should go to the ETH rollup, ETH Align folks, and are there cases where you might say, hey, actually you should go to the Sovereign folks? Like, how do you think about that?
So given that Sovereign natively leverages like the data availability throughput of data availability optimized chains like Celestia, and also we have written the like stack from the ground up optimized for rollup performance and sequencer throughput. We do see that we do see that teams trying to build the most performant rollup applications will have a much better time leveraging Sovereign SDK. Also, teams that want to really push the limits of how much they can customize their applications. So those are the applications that we really like to see in Sovereign SDK. At the same time, you can have vanilla EVM too. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add to this a bit. So the one cool thing about the Arbitrum's tech stack is something we're working on is Stylus. It's a WebAssembly-based virtual machine that doesn't replace the EVM. It actually runs alongside of it. And so the WebAssembly VM allows for smart contracts to be written in any programming language that compiles down to WASM. So that includes Rust and C and C++ and some others. And this WASM VM executes native assembly code much faster than Geth executes EVM bytecode, and that speed of execution translates into some really significant gas savings. And so what's nice about Stylus is you don't lose anything about the EVM. It's completely additive. And so when developers are building on an Arbitrum chain with Stylus, they not only can tap into like the EVM liquidity and network effects and still tap into Solidity developers, they also get access to this WASM VM, where they can write cryptographically intense and computationally intense, memory intense applications that wouldn't be feasible in the EVM. So Arbitrum chains do support this like efficiency optimized execution environment that may not be available in like other type of stacks where you have to either choose like EVM or alt VM. With Stylus, you get both. And I think to touch on like maybe some applications that I would suggest using like a more sovereign framework would like I really like just the idea of having like super fast finality between a bunch of chains as well, and essentially being able to rely on social consensus as your like sort of last line of defense, like as a rollup, settling to Ethereum. Your canonical state is defined by like an L1 smart contract, and so as a sovereign rollup, like your canonical state is defined by the chain itself, and so there's definitely pros and cons to this, but at the end of the day, it's like it's your community who's in charge of the canonical state, and so if these things are like really important to your application, then I think like sovereign could make a lot of sense.
I think that's a common misconception. The sovereign rollup just means that your rollup is a pure function of the base DA layer. Things like forced transactions, which you want to rapidly enable, are not dependent on smart contracts, so forced transactions and stuff can become way cheaper. But the moment these rollups do post proofs and have bridges to other rollups in the same ecosystem, the bridges then become the determining factor for what rollup is the actual rollup. I think social consensus was basically a meme around sovereign rollups that was memed in the wrong way. Bridges at the end of the day determine which rollup is running the right state transition function. So I'll.
Is it
Yeah.
is it like what is making it sovereign then if its canonical state is defined by like
Great
something
question.
else?
Great question. So so to prove the correctness of your rollup, what smart contract rollups are doing, both OP Stack, Arbitrum Orbit, is so you post some data and then you're going to run your like state transition function on top, right? You're going to correctly execute those transactions as you posted to Ethereum. What happens is that you first of all take all the blobs you posted as part of the call data and then you hash it, and you make sure that hash matches the attestation that comes from the attester of the OP Stack or Arbitrum Orbit rollup. So that hashing and checking happens inside the EVM execution. So it does bring a little bit of cost, and you're dependent on the smart contract to tell you what is correct or not. In just general sovereign rollup architecture, rollups are defined as whatever you see on the DA layer is like you basically have a function and you feed in all the data that refers to the rollup in the base blockchain, and you achieve a certain state root. You can prove that certain state root by running a full node yourself, or you can run that full node under a ZK prover, and you can get a ZK proof of the state root. So you basically remove redundancy on the base layer smart contract. It just makes like the whole rollup construction simpler. It allows us to iterate faster, and it allows us to go beyond Ethereum.
Okay, so like your definition of a sovereign rollup is more so like extending the responsibilities of the DA layer and then also leveraging ZK proofs.
Not extending the responsibilities. The responsibilities of the DA layer are the same. You actually minimize the dependencies that you ask from the base blockchain. You don't involve smart contract execution, and you offload that computation to the ZK proving.
Cool. That's good clarification. Maybe in the last couple of minutes here, how do you think, what do you think are things that you're excited about for the next 12, 18 months? Like as you look forward, what are things, the world looked really, really different 18 months ago. What do you think the world looks like over the next year, year and a half? Like if we're having this conversation next year at ETH Denver, how do you think the world is different and what are you really excited about?
Yeah, I'm excited about seeing real decentralized applications at scale. Like we talk a lot about like blockchains finding product market fit, and in some cases they really have, but in most cases, and especially in like mainstream use cases, we haven't found that. And I think the infrastructure is actually ready this time. We may have been saying that for a while, but the ability to spin up your own chain has never been easier. Like that's indisputable. And 12 to 18 months ago, that landscape looked extremely different. And so I think in 12 to 18 months from now, we actually can see like these applications be running at scale, whether it be through like horizontal scaling with many chains or vertical scaling with alternate VMs and parallelization. And so like seeing like whether it be from on-chain games or on-chain social or stable coins, like actually hitting mainstream adoption that is enabled by having like these high throughput, highly customizable while still remaining like relatively trustless and decentralized is something that, in the next 12 to 18 months, I would really be hopeful that we hit.
And maybe just building on that for a second, because you mentioned a couple there. If you had to guess, like what are your top candidates for what those things might be? Like you mentioned a couple there. Are those basically your top candidates, like games and stablecoins, or how do you think about what those use cases might actually be?
Yeah, so stable coins are the easy one. I mean, you can look at like the denomination of any other like fiat currency against the dollar, and it looks ugly for almost all of them. And so just giving worldwide open and permissionless access to a U.S. dollar-backed stablecoin is extremely powerful, and I think is like a fundamental use case that actually has a market of several billion users. And then like when it comes to more consumer applications that aren't primarily financial, so when that comes to like social apps and gaming, like on-chain data is so primitive now. Like most addresses haven't really built up any kind of portfolio of on-chain actions. And I think we're going to see on-chain data just increasingly become extremely valuable because any app can compose on it and no one can stop them from that. And so like whether it be like the buildup of these social apps, and I think Farcaster is in a really like elegant example of this, being able to take that data that people can now like are just building up like a portfolio of on-chain data just using something as simple as a social application, and then allowing others to come and compose on top of that data is going to just like unlock so many cool things that we can't even really imagine right now.
Yeah, one thing, Jem, before I hand it to you, Jesse kind of touched on this morning too with Frames, but having been at Facebook and worked on social, like 10 plus years ago, the Farcaster Frames thing to me reminds me a lot of kind of like circa 2003 social networks, where like there were these proto-social networks before Facebook and MySpace floating around, that if you tinkered with, and I was sort of tinkering with, they weren't ready yet quite, but you kind of looked at them and it kind of felt like a glimpse of the future, and I very much feel like maybe crypto social is starting to be there. I saw some data around Lens having 200,000 accounts and Farcaster's at probably 200,000 dailies or weeklies. Like it's pretty real. It's not a billion users yet, but it's sort of starting to feel like a proto-social network that might actually be real. It's pretty fascinating. Cem, what do you think? When you're 12 months from now, looking back, what are you really excited about, and what do you think is going to happen?
I'm really excited about what the level of experimentation that's going to get unlocked by these rollup frameworks, enabling massive scale securely. Because I think the value of blockchain comes from open systems, open APIs, where entrepreneurs can build on top of each other's like tooling without being scared that Twitter is going to shut down their APIs and stuff like that. So like we've seen a lot of expensive applications because those were the only ones who were able to achieve product market fit without before everything became super expensive. Now I'm excited about seeing a lot of applications that don't necessarily need to be finance related, but you just post your data and your your backend onto blockchain. And I think that type of application is now going to be unlocked by the type of work that rollup frameworks are working on.
Do you have specific candidates? Like when you think about what are your top three where you're like, man, it would be awesome? Or are you already seeing people and you're like, these are going to be really great? Or yeah, what are you most optimistic about?
I think frames are incredible.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see more and more like quick sipping up rollups becoming the backend for frames or
Any specific use cases on frames that you really like?
no specific use case that I like so far. I do know that it's something that we should be experimenting a lot with.
My favorite, for what it's worth, if anybody has seen it, is is e-commerce in frames. If anybody saw like the Girl Scout cookie experiment that ran on Farcaster, and they sold $10,000 worth of Girl Scout cookies because it was just a one-click buy, basically. Like they built a shopping cart right into Farcaster. It was pretty sweet. Fun fact, that was my niece.
No way. I was so excited when I saw that. Like I thought that was super cool. I was ordering, but then I came to the Coinbase like ordering part, and that kind of like made me sad because that should be happening on chain with like stable coins and etc. Like Coinbase facilitating that transaction was kind of a downer. But yeah, I'm super excited to see more and more full-on native integrations of frames.
Yeah, it was super interesting because they hacked it together so quickly. And so they, for anybody who's on Farcaster, just been tracking this, and if you haven't, it's a really cool story to check out. But which I think will go down in the lore of like Warpcaster, Farcaster. But you know, a couple folks, Brian and Jonathan and Chris, like sort of had this idea, and they just cast out, hey, does anybody know a Girl Scout? And they just happened to be the first person to respond and say like, oh yeah, I have a 5-year-old niece, and here's her like troop number. And so they baked it in there, and then literally we're still processing the orders because it turns out we have to do them by hand. There's no API. The Girl Scouts are not on a sovereign rollup yet, and so the girl. Maybe I'll stop rambling about this, but it's really funny to me because like the credit card company didn't know what to do because we were ordering like 1,000, 1,500 boxes of Girl Scout cookies, and so they kept thinking it was fraud, so they kept shutting us down. And I was like, man, this is why we need crypto. And then the Girl Scouts got a little freaked out, so they like called and they're like, wait, did your credit card get stolen? Like, did you really do this? And then I tried explaining to them that a bunch of strangers on the internet bought $10,000 worth of Girl Scout cookies, and they didn't understand. It's like pretty, but it was like definitely a view into the future. So I actually think frames for e-commerce is like a kind of a sleeper. Like if you just one-click buy something while you're in like a Wirecutter article, it's like the next evolution of one-click from Amazon.
Even the NFT mints are super cool.
Super cool.
Like you just click a button and Warpcaster wallet is like integrated, and without knowing, you've taken an on-chain action. This is exactly what I was talking about, like being able to like creating a lot of on-chain data which others can build on permissionlessly.
All right, unfortunately we're out of time. Thank you everybody for listening. Thank you guys for your insights. You'll be around, I think, if anybody wants to talk, if anybody wants to get specifics on SDKs. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.